Hello, lovely people, and welcome to the latest review. I had a plan in mind, but I've taken a detour from that plan because recently I'm on a worship team and we read this book together. And it was my second time reading it. I read it when the book first came out, and I read it again this past week, and I was like, you know what, I already read it, might as well review it. So that book is The Reset by Jeremy Riddle. I kept that frame there because people said you should always have your thumbnails be books covering your face. And I was like, that's funny. I'm going to do that. At least for now. We'll see. You know, it might not be permanent, okay. So, yes, but before we get into this book, I wanted to say a few things. I saw that some people commented and told me in person that if I do biographies like God's Generals that has like 10 biographies in one, to go by it in order. Because some people said they want the Spark Notes. So I am like a, Christian book review Spark Notes, because some people are like, I don't want to read it, but I want the Spark Notes. So we're going to do that. And like I said, the schedule is the first and third Monday of every month, but on occasion I might sprinkle some in other reviews in. Like there's a movie I want to watch, but I already have my other book review planned, and I really want to get to it because I love that book. So I might sprinkle in that movie in sooner. So we're going to do that. Second disclaimer for this book, most of what I had in mind were kind of like biographies. I wanted to do like Christian themed books, which is kind of what this is, the category I'm calling it at least, which isn't the real category, but I just made it up. Sorry. But yeah, so most of them were like biographies that I've done so far. And so that's a lot easier to summarize someone's life and cool stories and hit on what was highlighted for me and things like that. This is more to do in the realm of worship, so it's my first time, and I'm trying to think of how to discuss this book because it is thematic, and there are, Jeremy Riddle talks about moments in his life, lessons in his life with this, but it overall has to do with the theme of worship, and which is open discussion. My worship team reviewed this book together or discussed it, and one chapter or one line ended up becoming a whole discussion that had nothing to do with the book per se, but the subject of worship. So I'm like, how do I go and do this without going on tangents? So give me grace today. Maybe I should have rehearsed, but I didn't. So we're going to try this out. I do enjoy this book, and it's kind of cool that I'm reviewing this on a reread, because I think even from when the first time I read this, internally my perspective is a little bit different, but not a whole lot, but still enough to where I feel like I enjoyed this a lot more and pondered a lot more in the second read. The first one I was still trying to, I guess, figure out things that I was doing in this realm. That makes sense, pondering what this is, and so I was kind of had my guard up, because he's kind of lived through it. If you don't know Jeremy Riddle, he is a worship leader. He is out in Southern California, Anaheim, and but he's been in movements like Vineyard and Bethel, worship movements, made it big, toured, did all the things, and he kind of was just that ain't it. That is not the epitome of worship. If you're a worship leader, that is not the end-all be-all. The end-all be-all is Jesus, and that is the ultimate theme of this book. But he goes through different things. He gives his brief worship history, so you do get a little biography. Basically, he wanted to be a rock star, and God was like, that ain't your calling. And I'm laughing at my own phrasing of that ain't your calling. God talking like that. Anyways, apologies. Hopefully I didn't offend you. Anyways, so he goes through and he goes through his surrender, giving it up to God, but he also goes through things in the worship realm that we know. I should say more the worship industry, and he goes through things I don't know how I feel about this, or maybe we should do education on this and that, because we don't really talk about this. He talks about there's a more practical side where he talks about filming. He was maybe there should be an etiquette to what should be filmed and what should not, or when's the right moment. using discernment and things like that, or like ticket sales for worship events. He was like, I don't know how I feel about this, but he kind of leaves it open-ended, and he says that he thinks that these things can be done correctly, but that's not near the end of the book. But he talks about just reformation and worship, but ultimately he brings it down to worship being about Jesus, which is just the truth, and that things can get muddy when we make it about money, when we make it about career, when we make it about industry. And I think, that's a whole can of worms that could be discussed, because there's valid points on many ends in the side of the business of just like, well, the person wrote the song, so they should get paid. I think that's true as a songwriter, but it can also get muddy and sticky. And so the book kind of unpacks that in a way, and provides thought-provoking questions in those instances, in those chapters, that those things are discussed and brought up. And I think those are important questions to have, because at the end of the day, a lot of the motive comes down to the heart. Like, what is the motive of the heart when you do these things? And maybe it sounds like, so far, that this book sounds like it's just for worship leaders, and it is, I think, a high recommendation for me, for worship leaders, worship team members, artists, songwriters that want to go in their own, feel called into worship. I think it is just a must read, just to at least get your thinking and provoked with these questions and these ponderings. But I would genuinely say I'd recommend it just for anyone who loves Jesus and wants to worship, because it gets into more than just the industry. Like, that is a big thing of what he's seen, what he's lived through, and he comes with his, critiques and everything. But like I said at the beginning, he makes worship about Jesus, that is the essence of worship. If or true worship, we worship in spirit and truth. And so it's like, yeah, it's true that worship can be done to other things. Like, people worshiped idols in the Old Testament, and I mean, we still have idols today, let's be fair. They might not just look the same, but we can idolize and worship anything. But true worship comes down to Jesus. Like in the book of Revelation, they're all centered around Jesus, the Lamb. And so that is what this is unto. And so even if you are not on a worship team, if you're not a worship leader, or feel called to just songwriting or whatever, I still recommend this book, because it's just about the beauty and the simplicity of what worship really is. I'm coming back to that simplicity, and from being someone who's not on that side of things, who's not leading every Sunday or even trying to, there's still just the revelation of just true worship and the beauty of it and the heart of it that any and every believer would receive and appreciate reading this. Because at the end of the day, we're a royal priesthood. As we know, the scripture says we are all priests to minister to the heart of God, and that is the worship. So it's not just because someone's on the stage and someone is writing songs and is a musician or sing, and maybe you're none of those. You're not, don't have a platform. You don't sing or are musical in any way. You're still a priest before God, and you are still a worshiper in his eyes. And so from that perspective, I do recommend this book as well, just because we're all called to it at the end of the day, just to have this heart and to pour ourselves upon him. And it can just open your eyes to the schemes of the enemy. Like, yeah, the enemy just will take anything, any crack he can find, and try to pervert what he can, because he just tries to pervert what's good and make counterfeits. And so it's just eye-opening in that aspect as well. And so, yeah, it's a high recommendation for me. Hopefully I did this well, and it's really cool because, like I said in previous books, he does quote other things. He does quote other books. And one book I have that I haven't read yet, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I get to read that soon because I haven't read that yet. And then he quotes like a theologian that I've never heard of. So it's like, oh, I would like to read that because it was a theologian discussing worship. Because at the end of the day, a lot of our worship should be shaped by our theology because it just reflects who God is. And the first time my worship team was discussing this week, the first time that God declares who he is to someone was to Moses. And Moses' instant response was to fall on his face and worship. And vice versa, the first time we see worship mentioned in the Bible is Abraham, and it's Abraham having a revelation of who God is. So at the end of the day, our worship comes at a revelation of who God is and his character and his nature, and are awestruck by who he is and how good he is and wonderful and merciful and all of the things. And so we're all called to it. We're all priests before him, a royal priesthood. So high recommendation for this book. You get into some of the theology of it, and I think anyone who just loves Jesus would appreciate it. And I love Jeremy Riddle. He has such a pure heart, and he's just going after the Lord, and just really respect him. So 10 out of 10 recommend. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sorry. I'm just sorry today. But on a serious note, if you like the video, then like the video. If you dislike it, you can dislike it, I guess. But why would you? You know, at the end of the day, please subscribe if you enjoy following this. If you want to get more book reviews, who knows? Maybe more subscribers, more things. I'll put more effort. Maybe start a book club and just read together. Because that's kind of why I started this. Is because I just want to blab on about books I read, to be honest. And so it's fun for me. And it could be more fun to do with friends, just like I did this weekend where I discussed it with them. Even though it was definitely more on the quiet end. But I ponder a lot. And here's where I'm getting all my ponderings out and my reviews out. But yeah, I enjoyed this book, like I said. So I recommend, and it's just thought-provoking and worship and like a heart check at the end of the day. So yes, feel free to subscribe. I think the next book, hopefully, that I'm doing is going to be The Intercessor. It's about Reese Howes, who, yeah, if you've never heard of him, tune in to get a lesson. But you might see a movie review in the next Monday, potentially. We'll see how busy this week gets for me. But yes, read this book. Tell me your thoughts. If you haven't read the book, you can tell me the thoughts on the review. Tell me if you're intrigued. Leave comments because I want to talk about the things. So if you've read the book, tell me your favorite moment or the questions that you have or thoughts that you provoked. Because it did give us some discussion, like back and forth between friends when me and the worship team were doing it. We're like, well, I think this. Well, I kind of think this. And so, you know, it's good to ponder those things with people. So feel free to leave it in the comments. But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.